Samurai Jack is one of those cartoons that I have the absolute utmost respect for its bold take on a more stylized, artistic, action-based animated series with incredible pacing, storyboarding, design, and backgrounds especially. I've already sung this series' praises to hell and back before, so doing so at this point might be a little redundant. Instead, I'm just going to jump into the subject of today's video, that being the second Samurai Jack game to release following the Amulet of Time, which I also recently covered in a separate review. We're heading back to home consoles with this one, as Samurai Jack: The Shadow of Aku was released for both the PS2 and GameCube in March of 2004, with an Xbox version planned but never fully finished. The game, thankfully, was not published by BAM Entertainment, and it was actually saved in development by Adrenium after the game's initial plans were set to fall through and never be finished. It's pretty cool, and I'm really glad that Adrenium stepped up their game in order to get this title out, because I genuinely think that The Shadow of Aku, especially compared to the Amulet of Time, lives up to being a Samurai Jack video game. I'm not sure why there seems to be a common occurrence with an Xbox version of a game planned but never fully finished. Whether it was a cost issue or the game not being profitable enough to be ported over to another system, I'm not sure, but the same held true for Relish Rampage, which was also released on both PS2 and GameCube, albeit a year apart. Weird, but thankfully enough, BAM Entertainment has nothing to do with this game, and I couldn't be happier because right out of the gate, I can announce that this title absolutely blows the Amulet of Time out of the water. Nearly every criticism that I had towards Amulet of Time is not necessarily applicable to Shadow of Aku, which made my experience playing this game way more pleasant than the former title. But I'll get into that as the video goes along. First, we have a plot to summarize real quick. The game opens to an establishing shot as Jack attempts to climb up a giant mountain before accidentally misstepping and nearly falling to his death, only to be saved by a little green man voiced by Tom Kenny, who then tells him of Aku's evil affecting their village a short ways from there. Jack then proceeds to head to this village, where he is informed that the leader of their tribe has been taken hostage by Aku, and after a quick journey to rescue him from the clutches of evil, he manages to do so just fine, until he learns that the king's priest is capable of informing him of how to access a time portal to get back to his own time, whom he is also able to save without issue. After fighting a bunch of Aku's robots, of course. The priest points him in the direction of a tree spirit, who then requests Jack to help him clear out Aku's drones in exchange for information as to where he could find the time portal. And after a brief excursion through the forest, Jack is able to defeat Aku's weapons of mass destruction without issue, and the tree spirit points him to a cavern inside a volcanic mountain. Jack then proceeds to enter the cavern to rescue an archaeologist who can help him find the portal, and lo and behold, after clearing out more of Aku's drones, he's able to track down the portal, but it ends up getting taken off to Aku City at the last minute. From here, Jack takes the next train to the area in order to give chase, but he loses sight of it somewhere in the city. After some daring exploration, including a handful of run-ins to some old friends from the series, such as X-Store and the Scotsman, Jack proceeds to find the location of where Aku is keeping the time portal, and so he heads to Aku's lair in order to hopefully travel back to the past once and for all. I'll bet you never guess how that turns out. Upon arriving to the lair, Jack has an encounter with his evil self, Mad Jack, seen in one of the episodes from the show, whom he wipes the floor with, and then proceeds to take on Aku mano a mano in the grand climactic fight of the game. Of course, with this being Samurai Jack, Aku gets the upper hand at the last second and sends Jack plummeting to his doom, before the Scotsman comes in to save him at the last minute, allowing Jack to escape without any chance of getting into the time portal, bringing the story of Shadow of Aku to a close. And yeah, that's all there is to it. That's literally how it ends. It's pretty faithful to the show in that regard, given that it consists of this long, perilous journey Jack takes to try and get home, only to fail and keep the status quo intact at the end of the game. But I have similar feelings to how I did towards the handheld Ed, Edd n Eddy games, in the sense that while I admit it's faithful to the series and it wouldn't make sense for Jack to succeed and have the canonical ending of the show take place inside an unrelated licensed video game, but it doesn't feel like it's gets a real conclusion and it leaves the player feeling very unsatisfied. Jack escapes with the Scotsman and then it just ends with a fade out into darkness. No celebration, no resolution or moment of falling action, and I think that's what hurts it the most of all. It's also not a very inspired plot, seeing as the first 3 worlds solely exist to extend a fetch quest styled storyline of Jack meeting a character who tells them to go speak with another character, who tells him to go see another character, who tells him to go see another character, and so on and so forth. It's not bad, but it's basic and nowhere near as intricate as the cartoon itself could get from time to time. Would have been nice to have a final scene of reflection as Jack talks about maybe where he's going to head next, or have a final celebration where Jack and the Scotsman attend some kind of festival with the tribe of green alien creatures that Jack rescued earlier in the game. I don't know, something would have been nice, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Whether or not it's worse than the conclusion of the episode where Jack learns how to jump good, well, I suppose that's up in the air.
This gateway to the past is once more beyond your reach. You can fly?
No, jump good.
And that's the story of Shadow of a Coup. I wouldn't say it's a particularly memorable story, but certainly way more immersing than the lackluster plot of the Amulet of Time. It also helps that all of the show's voice actors reprise their respective roles here in this game. Phil Lamar as Jack, Tom Kenny, Jeff Bennett, Jennifer Hale as the background voices and secondary characters, Mako as Aku, and so on.
So, Samurai Jack, you have come to find your time portal? Here it is, Samurai. Do you want it?
I will defeat you with or without the portal.
Then you won't mind if I destroy it.
No!
Just as I suspected. You want this time portal so that you can fight me in the past. I am too powerful for you now, Samurai!
Honor and justice will always triumph over power.
We will see about that.
The gameplay though, that's really where the game shines, because for a 2004 licensed game, The Shadow of Aku is a pretty enjoyable title. I managed to marathon through the whole thing in about 2 sittings, so this would definitely make for a good distraction over the course of, say, a weekend or something. As soon as the first cutscene ends, the game throws you straight into the first level, which, as with most video games, acts as the tutorial of the game. The moment I began to move Jack around on screen, I instantly exhaled a huge sigh of relief, as thankfully, the control of Jack in this game is pretty smooth. I never had an instance throughout the entire time where I thought Jack felt too stiff or too loose to control, and his momentum in the air was far more manageable this time around. Jack's moveset in this game consists of a double jump, a weak attack, and a strong attack, both of which can be comboed together to yield various different results. The game also has multiple move scrolls hidden in various levels, which will let Jack perform new moves once learned by pressing the attack buttons in a particular order. Jack also has the ability to perform a ground slam attack in the air if he double jumps, but the best move in the entire game comes in the form of his, are you with me? Single jump strong slash attack, which creates a downward arc as Jack swings his blade forward in the air. Something I've observed in my time as a player of video games is that in practically every example I can think of, the downward aerial attack is almost always broken, or at the very least, extremely useful. It's easily the most powerful move here. I know for a fact it's extremely effective when using it as Kirby's fighter power-up in that series, and in a lot of 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up games it can be extremely useful too. I've yet to find a game where this move isn't useful, if not absurdly broken. Anyways, back to the game at hand here. Jack also has the ability to activate his Sakai mode, which is represented by the blue meter that fills up as Jack defeats more and more enemies. The game essentially goes into a slowdown sequence where Jack is able to more nimbly navigate around enemies and strike them. I personally never found myself using this ability much, seeing as I had no trouble just using the basic attack moves, but it certainly has its uses. The game also automatically goes into similar moments from time to time, usually when Jack gets a high combo or strikes down 4 or more enemies in a brief amount of time, as well as when one of those special moves like the windmill attack gets used. As far as enemy variety in this game goes, it could be a bit better. The first 3 worlds only have a small handful of enemy types, which leads to the game getting very monotonous after having to fight the same saw blade robot for like the 20th time. It was cool that the iconic beetle robots from the series actually showed up though. I mean, that was awesome, but I sorta wish there was more enemy variety present here, and that's one thing I will give Amulet of Time over this game, because fighting enemies, while fun, feels like you're doing the same thing over and over again. For instance, the projectile attackers. Projectile-based enemies can be a real threat when facing hordes of enemies, as they can stun Jack briefly and kill a combo attack chain, so those are the ones that should be taken out first. However, these hordes can be somewhat infrequent, at least until towards the end of the game. Most of the time what ends up happening is something along the following. And these enemies are fought the same way every single time. At least in melee combat, things get more interesting, as some creatures are able to guard attacks and use ranged weapons such as whips in order to get the upper hand on Jack, but the projectile-based ones, just block, send it backwards, and kill them. It's that simple. The game isn't so much of a platformer as it is a 3D action game with a bigger emphasis on combat that uses platforming and puzzle solving to fill in the gaps as Jack progresses through each level. The boss fights are also pretty fun. Sure, the first one is kinda lame with it just being two of the buzzsaw robots thrown together, but later on Jack fights a giant magma creature, Mad Jack, the Scotsman. These are all pretty fun fights, if a bit on the easier side, and go figure that the final boss of the game is, you guessed it, Aku.
What?
The Aku fight was cool, albeit a little underwhelming. The first phase of the battle merely consists of an enemy gauntlet that doesn't take too long to get through, and then the second phase has Aku taking on various forms like a fish and a dragon, which is fun. Considering that shapeshifting is such an iconic ability of Aku's, this wouldn't be a fun boss fight without it, so thankfully it delivers. The game is broken down into 4 main worlds based on the 4 major story arcs of the game: the mountainous region, the forest, the magma cavern, and Aku City, all of which are reasonably stylized to the likes of the show. As with the console version of Misadventures, I think the environment design is pretty good and translated decently well from the 2D designs, but characters are a little rough in some places. Still nowhere near as bad as the Eds look in their game, and Jack looks way better than Professor Utonium did in Relish Rampage if you're looking for a more apt comparison. But the Scotsman though.
I will not fight you.
Aye, I wouldn't expect you to, you wee little dress-wearing dwarf.
You are trying to goad me.
If that's what you call it, you pint-sized wood-shoed ninny. You're just scared to fight a real man with that butter knife, you wee wimpy daisy. I'll plaster this cage with your guts and use what's left in the haggis.
Enough!
And Aku could look a little better too, especially with his eyelids in the cutscenes, because those are really distracting. The only 2 sections of the game that I have any complaints towards in terms of world design are both in Aku City, with the first consisting of a sequence where the building Jack is inside is supposed to self-destruct, and there are these weird black barriers that I had no idea how to get through. I'm not sure if there was just something I was missing, heck I probably was, but I just took the hit and used my invincibility frames to cheese past them because I wasn't sure what else to do. My second complaint is with the giant tower climbing section, just because it was obnoxious having to work my way up over and over again after falling so far down, because depth perception in this game is not always the greatest when it comes to the platforming sequences, especially in this section. I wish there was an easier way to die and get back to the checkpoint faster after falling off the stage, but alas, the only way you get sent back quickly is if you fall from the clock hands all the way down to the ground. If you fall from the top section to the middle and then the middle to the bottom, you gotta work your whole way back up again. Not a fan of that. But my thoughts on Shadow of Aku end there. I realized this review was on the shorter side of things, however I would say this game is quite the enjoyable experience. Far greater than the Amulet of Time, and a fun enough action game that is a good length for what it is. If this game went on for another 5 hours, then maybe I'd have some issues, but nah, for a 4 to 6 hour game, this is pretty enjoyable, up there with Misadventures and the like. Next in the Samurai Jack video game series comes a 2020 console game release published by Adult Swim Games titled Samurai Jack Battle Through Time, a game released many years after the series had come to its conclusion, which exists as an intermixing of Season 5 of the show along with the previous 4. However, I'm actually going to be saving that video for a special occasion, so instead I'm going to be switching things up and heading over to Nick Games now as I take a look at the Danny Phantom series next. I figured with it being October and Halloween coming up, it would be a fitting month to cover them. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to it. Until next time, Shadowstreak signing off.